The last thing Emma heard before the world went black was the deep, desperate bark of her dog, Max, a sound filled with more love than fear. She didn't know how long she had before the bear would reach her, but as her breath became shallow and her vision blurred, she realized one thing: Max wasn't just a dog. He was her protector, her family, and he would fight until his last breath to save her. The thought of losing him was unbearable. But as her world began to fade, she knew that he had already given her something far more valuable than survival. He had given her the gift of unconditional love, a bond that could never be broken. The rain came down in sheets as if the sky itself were mourning. It had been a long night for Emma Carter, the kind of night where everything seemed to fall apart at once. She had walked out of her father's house hours ago, left behind the shouting, the accusations, the slammed doors, and the ache that had settled deep in her chest like an old wound. No one ever saw it, but she felt it every day, the weight of being invisible, unwanted. The cold was bitter, sharp enough to sting her skin through her thin jacket. Her hands trembled not from the chill, but from the fear and the adrenaline that coursed through her. 17 years old, and she felt like the world was closing in on her, as if there was no space left for her to breathe. She had no destination, just a vague, desperate hope that somehow, somewhere, she'd find a place she could exist without the constant feeling of being small, of being nothing. Her shoes squelched through puddles as she walked, the streets empty and silent, save for the soft tapping of the rain on the pavement. She passed by the alleyways, the familiar neon lights of diners and convenience stores, but it all felt distant. She didn't belong here, in this city, in this life. Not anymore. And then she heard it, a soft whimper, barely audible, swallowed by the sound of the rain. At first, she thought it was the wind, or maybe her own mind playing tricks on her, desperate for something, anything, to feel real. But then it came again, clearer this time. Pitiful. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned the corner into a narrow alley and saw the source of the sound. A cardboard box, crumpled and wet, was shoved against a brick wall. The lid had fallen open, and inside, curled up in a small trembling ball, was a puppy. A German shepherd, barely older than a few weeks, soaked through and shivering, his big brown eyes wide with fear. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She knew abandonment when she saw it. She had lived it, the emptiness, the pain of being left behind. And there it was, in the form of this tiny creature, looking up at her with eyes full of unspoken questions. Her first instinct was to walk away. She was already carrying the weight of her own broken life. How could she possibly take on a dog, a living, breathing creature that needed care, food, love? What could she offer him when she had nothing left for herself? But she couldn't move. Something pulled her in. That desperation, that raw ache of the puppy's silence, it mirrored something inside her, something deep and unspoken. It was the same loneliness she had lived with for years, the same hopelessness that clung to her every day. She couldn't leave him there to suffer alone in the rain. She wouldn't. She crouched down, her knees sinking into the cold, wet asphalt. The puppy looked up at her with those huge, sorrowful eyes, his little body trembling. He was barely a few inches long, so fragile, so innocent. "It's okay," Emma whispered softly, her voice breaking with the weight of the moment. "I'm here." Slowly, she reached into the box, her hands trembling from the cold and the overwhelming feeling of responsibility that surged through her. She scooped him up carefully, cradling him in her arms. His fur was slick and damp, but there was a warmth to him, a tiny heartbeat that pulsed in her hands, steady and alive. For a moment, Emma just stood there, holding him close, her heart racing. It was like the world had stopped spinning. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so alone. Without thinking, she pulled her jacket tighter around them both, shielding him from the rain. She had no idea what she was doing, but she couldn't bear the thought of leaving him behind. He needed her, and she needed something to care about, something to hold on to. The weight of the world was heavy on her shoulders. But for the first time in ages, she didn't feel quite so small. She didn't feel quite so lost. As she walked down the empty street, the rain began to slow, just a little. The thunder rumbled in the distance, but it felt less threatening now. The cold, the loneliness, the ache of the night, it seemed a little less oppressive. Because she wasn't alone anymore, she looked down at the puppy in her arms. He was looking up at her, his big eyes filled with something like trust, despite the obvious fear he had experienced. He nuzzled into her chest, and she felt the soft weight of him there, a small, warm comfort that grounded her in a way she hadn't felt before. "I don't know what to do with you," she murmured, though she knew, deep down, the answer was simple. Take care of him. The thought was fleeting, but it settled deep in her heart like a promise. She would find a way. She continued walking, her steps slower now, as if she were walking into a new life. The puppy nestled closer to her, warm and trusting. He was her only companion now, her only constant. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, or if she even had a tomorrow, but in this moment she wasn't alone. Not anymore. When she finally reached her small, run-down apartment on the edge of the city, she didn't think twice. She pushed open the door, kicking off her wet shoes, and set the puppy down gently on the floor. "I don't have much," she said quietly, looking down at the little creature, his eyes wide with curiosity. "But I'll make it work." And with that, she shut the door, and for the first time, the silence in the apartment didn't feel empty. It felt like home. She didn't know it yet, but that night, on the edge of despair, Emma had found her family. The days that followed felt like a blur, a haze of exhaustion and small triumphs. The rain had stopped, but the weight of the world still pressed down on Emma's shoulders. She hadn't been able to sleep for days, the emotional drain of leaving her father's house, of feeling like a stranger in her own skin, was too much to process, but somehow, with the small life that now depended on her, Emma found a new rhythm. It wasn't much, just her, a tiny apartment, and a puppy who needed food, warmth, and love. Still, in that simplicity there was something unexpectedly powerful. The quiet moments when she would feed him, brush his fur, or just sit on the couch with him curled up beside her, gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't known she needed. She named him Max. It seemed fitting for the brave, scrappy dog that had found her. It was short, strong, and carried a certain weight, like he was destined for something greater, just like her. They were both fighting to survive in a world that didn't seem to care much about their struggle. And in that fight, they found each other. The first few weeks were challenging. Emma barely made enough money working 2 shifts at a local diner, serving greasy plates of food to weary customers who barely acknowledged her. She felt like a ghost there, her movements automatic, her thoughts distant, but she pushed through. For Max, for the life they were building, Max, in his puppy exuberance, had a way of making things easier. He would wait for her by the door, wagging his tail so hard it looked like he might take off at any moment. He would jump on her, knocking her over with his enthusiasm, making her laugh, even if just for a moment. The weight in her chest would lighten every time she looked into his big, trusting eyes. By the time Max was a year old, he had grown into a large, muscular dog, his coat a mix of golden browns and blacks. His presence was commanding, but there was still that softness in his eyes, a gentleness that only Emma could understand. He had become a part of her in ways she couldn't explain. His loyalty, her constant companion. One evening, after a particularly long shift at the diner, Emma returned to their apartment, her feet aching and her mind numb. The apartment was small and cramped, barely enough room for the 2 of them, but it was theirs, a place where she could shed the weight of the world. If only for a few hours each night. Max was waiting for her at the door, his tail wagging furiously. Emma smiled, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a real, deep sense of relief. She knelt down to pet him, her tired hands sinking into his thick fur. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. He leaned into her, nuzzling her hand as if he understood. Max had become her anchor in the storm. In a world that had given her so little, he had given her everything, his heart, his trust, his loyalty. And in return she gave him the same. She fed him, trained him, cared for him. He was her constant. Life wasn't perfect, but it was manageable. With him by her side, it was during these moments of peace that Emma began to realize how much Max had changed her. She had gone from being a girl who only knew how to survive to someone who could offer love and care. She found herself waking up earlier, taking more pride in her work, and even smiling sometimes when she looked at her reflection in the mirror. One night, as Emma walked home from the diner, she saw something that would change the course of their lives. A pet adoption event was being held on the corner of the street near the park. A colorful banner hung across the street, and behind the tables, volunteers were holding up puppies and kittens for people to meet. Emma paused, her heart sinking. She'd always wanted a better life for Max, a bigger place, more space to run, a future where they didn't have to struggle. But she couldn't afford anything more than the tiny apartment they already lived in. She was barely scraping by as it was, but when she looked down at Max walking beside her, his eyes full of trust, she knew what she had to do. She couldn't offer him much, but she could give him everything she had. "Let's go see what we can do for you, huh, Max?" she said with a smile. Max's tail wagged in response, as if he knew she was talking about something important. The event was small, but it was warm and welcoming. The volunteers smiled at her, handing her brochures on pet care and answering her questions about adopting another animal. Emma's heart hurt as she listened to their stories, her mind racing with the possibilities. She wished she could take in every dog there. She wished she could provide a home for all the abandoned creatures who were waiting for someone to care for them. But as she walked past the cages, looking at the other dogs, one of the volunteers, a woman with soft eyes, asked her, "Are you looking for a friend for your dog?" Emma glanced down at Max, who was standing beside her, his posture proud and protective. She shook her head. "No," she said, smiling softly. "I'm just here to see if I can find a way to make things better for him. He's my everything." The woman's eyes softened and she reached out, gently petting Max's head. "You're lucky to have him." Emma's chest tightened, the weight of the words hitting her in a way she hadn't expected. "I think I'm the lucky one," she said, her voice a little thick with emotion. "I wouldn't be here without him." As they walked away from the event, Emma realized something. She had spent so long trying to survive, trying to get by. But Max had taught her something else: how to live, how to love despite the odds, how to build something from nothing. And together they would make it through. Because they had each other, the world seemed to slow down when Emma and Max walked the trail. It was their place, a stretch of pine forests and rolling hills just outside the city. It was quiet here, so quiet that the only sounds that mattered were the crunch of the dirt beneath their feet and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. There was something magical about it, a world far away from the stress and noise of everyday life. Emma had always loved this trail. It was where she had come to escape when life felt like too much. It was where she could breathe, just for a moment, and forget the weight of the world pressing down on her. And Max, her constant companion, always seemed to sense when she needed to be here. The day they first walked this trail together, Max was just a little puppy. He had tugged at the leash, pulling her into the woods like he knew something she didn't. Now he was a strong, handsome dog, his fur a mix of golden browns and deep blacks, his frame broad and muscular from the years of running, jumping, and exploring. But in many ways, he still had the same youthful energy, the same enthusiasm for life that had first drawn her to him. Today, as Emma stepped onto the familiar path, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The sky above was clouded, casting a soft light on the earth below, but it was still warm enough for a light jacket. The air smelled fresh, a mixture of pine and damp earth, and the distant sound of a creek babbling somewhere in the woods brought a sense of calm to her tired heart. Max was beside her, his leash slack in her hand as he trotted ahead, his nose twitching with every new scent. She smiled, watching him. He had always been a curious dog, constantly exploring, sniffing, discovering the world around him. She loved watching his energy, how he embraced life with such abandon, and she couldn't help but wish she could do the same. After a few minutes of walking, Emma stopped to lean against a nearby tree. She closed her eyes, taking in the scent of the forest, the sound of the wind through the branches. She had worked a double shift at the diner the day before, and her body ached from the exhaustion. But here, in this place, surrounded by trees and earth, she felt lighter. Max came back to her side and nudged her with his nose, as if asking her to keep walking. She laughed softly and ruffled his fur. All right, boy," she said, her voice tired but fond. "Let's keep going." They moved deeper into the woods, following the winding trail that led them through a canopy of pines. The sunlight filtered through the branches, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Max, with his head held high, trotted ahead, his tail wagging in rhythm with his steps. Emma followed at a slower pace, enjoying the stillness, the quiet. It was moments like this, just her and Max walking through the woods, that Emma cherished the most. It was their escape. There were no demands, no expectations, no struggles to survive. It was just them, and the simple act of being together. As they walked, Emma's thoughts drifted. Her life had changed so much in the last couple of years. When she had first left her father's house, she had been scared. Scared of the unknown, scared of not knowing where she would end up. But now, as she walked this trail with Max beside her, she realized how far she had come. She wasn't where she had hoped to be, not yet, but she was stronger than she had been. And with Max by her side, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things could be okay. They reached the clearing by the creek, a place where the trees opened up to reveal a small, sparkling stream. The sound of the water rushing over rocks was soothing, and the sunlight, now breaking through the clouds, cast a warm golden hue on the landscape. Emma and Max had spent many hours here, sitting by the water, watching the world go by. Emma sat down on a large flat rock near the creek's edge. She stretched her legs out in front of her, letting the cool breeze wash over her. Max, ever the adventurer, bounded into the stream, splashing water everywhere as he chased a stick. She laughed softly, her heart lifting as she watched him. "Slow down, Max," she called, though she knew he wouldn't listen. He never did. The air was peaceful, and for the first time in days, Emma felt her body relax completely. She leaned back, resting her arms on the rock behind her, and closed her eyes. She could feel the sun warming her face, and the sound of Max's playful barks made her smile. Everything felt right in this moment. As if for a few hours the world outside the trail didn't matter. There was just her, Max, and the piece of the forest. After a while, Max came trotting back, his fur wet and matted with creek water. He dropped the stick at her feet, his big brown eyes staring up at her with a mix of pride and excitement. "Is this your way of telling me I need to throw it again?" Emma asked, laughing. Max wagged his tail furiously, and Emma reached down to pick up the stick. She tossed it back into the stream, watching as he bounded after it. His joyful energy contagious. As she watched him, something stirred in Emma's chest. She was always amazed by how much joy Max found in the simplest things: a stick, a new scent, a quiet moment by the creek. He had a way of teaching her to appreciate the little things, to find beauty in the ordinary. For a brief moment, Emma allowed herself to imagine a future. A future where she didn't have to worry about her next meal, her next rent payment, or the loneliness that often threatened to overwhelm her. In her mind, she saw a house with a yard, a place where Max could run free without the confines of a leash. She saw herself in a job she loved, surrounded by people who cared about her. It was a dream, one that felt out of reach, but it was there, flickering in her mind like a distant star. She shook the thought away. It was too much to think about right now. Instead, she focused on the here and now, the soft gurgle of the creek, the rustling of leaves, the feel of the cool breeze on her skin. She had Max, and for today, that was enough. Max trotted back to her, wet and happy, and dropped the stick at her feet again. "All right, one more time," she said, laughing. She tossed the stick again, and Max eagerly dashed after it, as if the whole world depended on him bringing it back. Emma watched him go, her heart full. For a moment, she let herself believe that everything would be okay, not because the world was perfect, but because in this small, quiet place she had everything she needed. And Max? He had her, forever. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when Emma and Max entered the familiar trail. The fading light cast long shadows across the winding path, but it didn't bother Emma. This was their sanctuary, a place that felt safe no matter the time of day. The familiar scent of pine filled the air, the rustling leaves above offering a quiet melody as they moved deeper into the forest. Max, now a powerful dog with muscles rippling under his coat, led the way as always. His ears perked up at every rustle, every sound, the keen senses of a protector in full alert. Emma was used to his vigilance. In the city she had always been hyper-aware of her surroundings, a survival instinct honed by years of uncertainty. But here, on the trail, with Max at her side, she felt a sense of peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing she was never truly alone. Still, there was something different in the air tonight. A heaviness, a stillness that wasn't usually present. Emma paused, glancing around. It wasn't just the lack of birds or the silence in the trees, it was the way the wind had stopped altogether. The world felt too quiet, too still. Max stopped. Ahead of her, his head cocked to the side, nose twitching. His body was tense and his tail, usually a constant wag, had gone rigid. He was sniffing the air, his gaze scanning the tree line as if something was hiding there. "Max?" Emma called softly, her voice a mixture of curiosity and unease. "What is it, boy?" The dog didn't respond. Instead, he moved closer to her, his body positioned between her and the woods, a silent barrier. Emma's heartbeat quickened. She had learned over the years to trust Max's instincts. If he was on alert, then something was wrong, and then, from the depths of the forest, there came a low growl. Emma froze, her blood running cold. It wasn't the typical sound of a coyote or raccoon. This was deeper, darker, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. Her breath caught in her throat as the growl grew louder, more menacing, and she knew in that moment exactly what it was. Bear. Her eyes scanned the trees, searching for any sign of movement. The last thing she wanted was to run into a bear while alone in the woods with only Max to protect her. There was no way she could outrun it, no way she could fight it off. Her mind raced, searching for any possible escape but the path behind. Her had grown narrow and overgrown, the woods thick with underbrush. She was trapped. Max's growl rumbled deep in his chest. He turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers with a look of unshakable trust. He was ready. "Stay close, Max," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words a prayer more than a command. Another growl echoed through the trees. Louder now, followed by the unmistakable sound of branches snapping under heavy weight. The bear was coming closer. Emma didn't have time to think, to plan. The only instinct she had was to move to get away. But Max wasn't about to let her run. Before she could make a move, he stepped forward, moving in front of her. His body was poised, ready to spring. "No," she whispered, reaching out to grab his collar. "Max, no, get back." But it was too late. With a terrifying roar, the bear emerged from the shadows of the trees. Its massive frame was a blur of black fur and claws, eyes wild with hunger and aggression. Emma barely had time to react before the bear was charging, its enormous paws crushing the ground with every step. Max didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, his sharp bark cutting through the air as he charged at the bear. His muscles coiled with a strength Emma hadn't seen in him before. He was determined, fearless, and ready to protect her at all costs. The bear, startled by Max's sudden movement, slowed for a moment, but its instincts kicked in immediately. It swiped a massive paw at Max, who dodged with incredible agility. But the force of the swipe sent him tumbling backward. Max landed on the ground with a grunt, but he was back on his feet in an instant, his eyes locked on the bear. "Max!" Emma screamed, panic rising in her chest. She wanted to run to him, to pull him away from the danger, but she knew she couldn't. Not with the bear this close. The bear turned its attention back to Max, its growl filling the air. Max snarled in return, his teeth bared, what the bear was. Too powerful, too large. Another swipe, and this time it caught Max across the side. He yelped in pain, but he didn't stop fighting. His loyalty to Emma was unwavering. Emma felt her chest tighten with a mixture of fear and helplessness. She couldn't watch this. She couldn't lose him. He was her protector, her family, the one constant in her life. Max wasn't backing down. He jumped again, this time landing on the bear's back, teeth sinking into the thick fur of its shoulder. The bear howled in pain, but its fury only grew. It twisted and writhed beneath Max, trying to throw him off. Without thinking, Emma grabbed a large branch from the ground and ran toward the fight. She didn't care about the risk. She just needed to help Max. Her heart was pounding in her ears as she swung the branch at the bear, hitting it with all her strength. The bear roared in fury, swiping at her, but it was distracted just long enough for Max to leap off its back and lunge at its throat. The struggle felt like an eternity. Max's barks, the growls of the bear, the sounds of claws scraping against bark was all a blur of terror and desperation. Emma's hands were shaking as she swung the branch again and again, trying to drive the bear away. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the bear stumbled back, its eyes wild with rage, but it realized the fight was no longer in its favor. With a final growl, it turned and fled into the woods, disappearing into the shadows from which it had come. Emma collapsed to the ground, her heart hammering in her chest, tears streaming down her face. Max was lying in the dirt, his breathing shallow, his side bleeding from the swipes of the bear. She crawled to him, pulling him into her lap, her hands shaking as she checked his wounds. No, Max, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please be okay. Max looked up at her, his eyes tired but still filled with love. He nudged her hand weakly, as if telling her he was fine. But the blood on his fur told a different story. Please, Emma whispered again, tears streaming down her face as she stroked his fur. Please don't leave me. She didn't know how long they stayed there, in the clearing, with the night falling around them. She didn't know how she managed to get Max home, but somehow, through sheer will, she made it. All that mattered was that he was still with her. He was alive. Her protector. Her hero. Her everything. The days that followed the bear attack were a blur of hospital visits, antibiotics, and painkillers. Max had been badly injured, his side torn open by the bear's claws, his leg bruised, and his spirit shaken. The doctors at the emergency animal clinic were amazed that he had survived. They told Emma he was a fighter, that Max's quick reflexes and sheer will to protect her had kept him alive, but Emma wasn't so sure. She knew Max wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for her. Every time he had lunged at the bear, every time he'd protected her with his body, she had seen the depth of his love and loyalty. It was a love she couldn't explain, a bond that went beyond what words could describe. Max had always been more than just a dog to her. He was her family, her best friend, the one constant in her life. He had saved her in so many ways, and now, after what he had done for her, Emma knew she would do anything for him. On the third day after the attack, Max finally stirred awake in his bed at the small apartment they shared. Emma had stayed by his side the whole time, rarely leaving his side except to grab food or medicine. She had been too afraid to leave him alone, too scared of what might happen if she did. Max, she whispered, her voice shaking as she sat beside him, running her hand through his matted fur. Hey, buddy. Max blinked his brown eyes, his head weakly lifting to look at her. It was a slow movement, but the flicker of recognition in his eyes was enough to send a wave of relief crashing over her. Hey, you, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. You scared me, you know that? Max's tail thumped weakly against the floor, his way of telling her he was okay. But Emma could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the toll that the fight had taken on him. He wasn't the same dog he had been before the attack. He was slower, weaker, but the fire in his eyes hadn't gone out. I was so scared I was going to lose you, she said, her voice breaking. You're all I've got, Max. I don't know what I would do without you. Max nudged her hand with his nose, offering the same comforting gesture he always had. His warmth, his presence was like a lifeline. He wasn't just a pet. He was her protector, her companion, the one who had stood by her through everything. For a long while, Emma just sat with him, letting the silence settle between them. It was a peaceful kind of silence, one that allowed her to finally process everything that had happened. The attack, the fear, the pain, it had all been so much, but Max had survived. They had both survived, and that's when it hit her. Truth she had known deep down all along. Max wasn't just a part of her life. He was her life. He was her reason to keep going. The next few weeks were spent healing. Max's wounds, though serious, began to close up. Slowly but surely, the cuts on his side healed and the bruises faded. But his spirit, the thing that had kept him going through the darkest of times, needed more care. He was reluctant to go on long walks, hesitant to leave the apartment. Emma understood. The bear's attack had been traumatic, and Max needed time to recover both physically and mentally, but Emma knew he was still the same dog, the same loyal companion who would do anything for her. And even though it would take time for him to trust the world again, she was there for him, one afternoon. As the first real signs of spring began to creep through the city, soft sunlight, green buds on trees, Emma made a decision. It had been a difficult one that had tugged at her heart, but it was one she knew was right. She needed to give Max the life he deserved. The apartment they lived in was small, cramped, and had no backyard. It was a place of survival, but it wasn't the place Max needed to thrive. He deserved more than the narrow, noisy streets of the city. He deserved space to run, to play, to feel the earth beneath his paws, and the freedom to roam. Emma had been saving for a while. Every extra penny she earned from her shifts at the diner had gone into a small savings account she had opened just for this purpose. She hadn't thought she would ever have enough, but now she realized she didn't need much. There were small houses on the outskirts of the city, tucked away in quiet neighborhoods, with yards big enough for Max to run and play in. She had found one she could afford, a little cottage with a garden and a patch of grass big enough for Max to run. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't anything extravagant, but it was a fresh start, a place where they could both heal together. That night, after Max had fallen asleep beside her on the couch, Emma sat on the floor beside him, her hand resting on his warm side. She gazed out the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She knew there would be hard times ahead. She knew they would have to adjust, that nothing would ever be easy. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of hope. "Tomorrow, we start over," she whispered to Max, her voice thick with emotion. "We're going to be okay, you and me." Max stirred in his sleep, letting out a soft sigh, and Emma smiled, tears rolling down her cheeks. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for certain: she and Max were meant to be together. No matter what happened, they would always have each other. The next morning, after a peaceful night's sleep, Emma made the call. She had the keys in hand. And just like that, their new life began. As the months went on, Max's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. He thrived in the yard, running freely every morning, chasing squirrels and rolling in the grass. His trust in the world slowly returned, piece by piece, until he was once again the dog who had saved her life, and the dog who had given her a new chance at hers. Emma looked at him one evening, his fur shining in the golden light of the setting sun, and whispered, "I'll never be able to thank you enough, Max, but I promise you I'll always take care of you, always." Max turned toward her, his eyes filled with the same unspoken understanding. They didn't need words. They had each other. And that was enough. Max saved Emma when it mattered most, but his fight for her survival wasn't the only battle he fought. Every dog like Max carries a story of loyalty, love, and sacrifice. If you've been moved by their bond, remember that you can make a difference too. Adopt, rescue, or support those who need it most. Every life is precious, and every act of love counts. Like Max, the ones who need us are waiting for a chance to show their hearts. Will you give them that chance? The choice is yours.